Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons and love are told. Please make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. I grew up in the heart of Chicago, in a house that never felt like home. From as far back as I can remember, my parents, Richard and Helen, made it clear that their pride rested in Damien and Clara, my so-called siblings. Damien was their golden boy, the one they paraded at church gatherings, the one they bought the newest gadgets for even when his grades were average at best. Clara was the princess, pampered endlessly, her smallest achievements exaggerated like royal milestones. And me? I was always the extra one, the child who somehow never shined brightly enough for them, no matter how hard I tried. When I brought home straight A's, they asked why I didn't win an academic competition on top of it. When I placed first in my high school debate tournament, they said the judges must have been lenient. Every step forward I took was somehow diminished, shadowed, or outright ignored. The few times I dared to protest, my mother would sigh, shaking her head as though I were being ungrateful. "Don't be dramatic, Leela," she'd say, dismissing my feelings as though they were childish fantasies. And my father? He barely looked at me unless I was being scolded. The only person who made me feel like I belonged was my grandmother, Margaret. She had a gentle way of pulling me aside during family dinners, slipping a small candy into my palm, and whispering, "You shine brighter than you think, sweetheart." Her kitchen smelled of cinnamon and lavender, and it was the only place where I felt safe enough to speak freely. She would listen to my stories about science fairs and my love for computers, nodding with genuine interest, while everyone else rolled their eyes. If not for her, I think I would have drowned in loneliness. By the time I reached high school, I began noticing how differently I looked from Damien and Clara. They both had my parents' pale skin, auburn hair, and sharp noses. I, on the other hand, had darker features, with thick black hair and warm brown skin that made me stand out like an uninvited guest in family photos. Whenever we walked into a restaurant together, people stared, trying to piece together the puzzle of how I fit into this family. And though no one said it aloud, I felt the question hanging in the air every single time. Still, I buried those doubts. I poured myself into academics and extracurriculars, believing that if I worked hard enough, I could finally earn a seat at the table of their affection. Stanford accepted me with a full scholarship, and I was ecstatic, but when I ran home to tell my parents, my father's first response was, "Stanford? That's on the West Coast. Too far. Are you sure you can handle it?" Clara rolled her eyes and muttered, "Who even wants to sit behind a computer all day?" That night, while everyone else celebrated Damien getting into a mediocre state college, I sat in my room, crying quietly into my pillow. It wasn't until my grandmother's death that the foundation of my world finally cracked open. I was 22, then, freshly graduated from Stanford, and working at a small tech startup. Margaret's passing gutted me. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and stifled sobs, but I forced myself to remain strong. I knew she would have wanted me to. The real blow came later, at the reading of her will. I remember sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of her lawyer, the scent of leather and old books heavy in the air. Damien and Clara were seated beside me, smirking as though they already knew what was coming. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. Damien was left her antique piano, Clara her jewelry collection. My parents received a portion of her savings, and a vacation home in Florida. And me? The lawyer paused, his eyes flicking toward me with what looked like pity. "To my granddaughter, Leela," he read, "I leave my ruby ring and $5,000. My heart dropped. It wasn't about the money, it was about what it meant. Had she loved me less? Had I imagined all those warm smiles and encouraging words? I clutched the ring in my palm, feeling its sharp edges press into my skin like a wound. But the real shock came when the lawyer shifted uncomfortably and added, "Margaret also requested that the following information be shared with Leela, in private if she chooses." The room went silent. My parents stiffened. Clara's smirk faltered. I followed the lawyer into a smaller office where he handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter in Margaret's handwriting, shaky but unmistakably hers. "My dearest Leela," it began, "I need you to know the truth before the world twists it. You were adopted. Richard and Helen took you in out of obligation after a distant relative passed away. They never spoke of it, but I watched how they treated you differently. I want you to understand that you are not unwanted, at least not by me. You are precious. That ring once belonged to my mother, and I give it to you so you always remember you are part of something beautiful. Even if they failed to see it, I could barely breathe. My entire life had just unraveled in a few sentences. Adopted, obligation, treated differently. It all made sense now, the cold stares, the lack of warmth, the endless favoritism. They had never wanted me. Not really. I stormed back into the main office, the letter trembling in my hands. Is it true? I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. My parents exchanged glances before my mother muttered, "Yes, we did what we could." You should be grateful we even took you in. Grateful. That word seared itself into my soul. Grateful for years of neglect? For being treated like a stranger in my own home? For being excluded from every reunion, every celebration, every family trip that I wasn't convenient for? I looked at Damien and Clara, who sat wide-eyed but unrepentant, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. "I don't owe you anything," I whispered. "Not my love, not my loyalty, not my future." That was the day I walked out of their lives, slamming the door on the past that had caged me. I packed my bags, returned to San Francisco, and vowed never to let them see me weak again. If they had cast me aside, I would rise so high they'd have no choice but to look up, but deep inside, beneath the rage, I carried the ache of knowing I had been discarded like an unwanted gift. That pain would drive me harder than anything else. It was my fuel, my silent vow to make something of myself, not for them, but in spite of them. When I returned to San Francisco after cutting all ties with my family, I carried nothing but a suitcase, a second-hand laptop, and the bitterness of betrayal burning in my chest. That pain became my compass. I threw myself into work with an obsession that scared even me at times. At the tiny tech startup where I had been working, I volunteered for every late-night project, every debugging marathon, every impossible task no one else wanted to touch. My colleagues thought I was reckless, but in truth, I was desperate. Desperate to prove that I wasn't a mistake, that I wasn't someone's obligation. The startup didn't last long. It folded within a year, leaving me with just a severance check and a hollow sense of déjà vu. Everyone else went home to their families, their parents ready to support them while they figured out the next step. I didn't have that luxury. I remember sitting in my tiny studio apartment, the hum of the refrigerator louder than my own thoughts, scrolling through job postings that all seemed to demand experience I didn't have. Still, I refused to give in. I started bartending at a dimly lit pub downtown to pay rent. By day, I taught myself programming languages I hadn't mastered in college: Python, JavaScript, C++. By night, I poured drinks and listened to strangers slur secrets I had no interest in. Sometimes, between pouring beers and wiping counters, I would scribble code on napkins just to keep my mind sharp. People laughed, called me the geeky bartender, but I didn't care. Every line of code I wrote felt like a step away from the version of me my family had discarded. It was at a free tech seminar one afternoon that my life began to shift. The speaker was Professor Mai Lin, a brilliant woman who specialized in cyber security. She spoke with a clarity that cut through the noise, describing how the digital world was the new battlefield and how protecting data meant protecting lives. I remember sitting in that crowded lecture hall, my heart racing, because, for the first time, I could see my future clearly. After the seminar, I gathered the courage to approach her. "Professor Lin," I stammered, clutching my worn notebook, I want to do what you're doing, but no one takes me seriously." She studied me with those sharp eyes, then asked, "Are you willing to fail 100 times before anyone listens?" I nodded without hesitation. That was the beginning of a mentorship that would shape my destiny. Professor Lin gave me resources, but more importantly, she gave me faith. She taught me not just how to code, but how to think strategically. "Security isn't just about walls," she told me once. "It's about anticipating where the cracks will form and reinforcing them before anyone else notices." Those words burrowed deep into my mind. With her guidance, I began developing the blueprint of what would one day become Fortress Tech, my own cybersecurity platform. I envisioned a system that could shield companies, governments, and ordinary people from digital predators, a shield so strong it would set a new standard in the industry. But dreams required money, and money was something I didn't have. I pitched my idea to dozens of investors, walking into gleaming offices with nothing but my laptop and determination. Again and again, I was turned away. Some laughed, saying I was too young. Others patronized me, suggesting I get a job at an established firm first. One man leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "Cybersecurity is a man's field, sweetheart. Why don't you aim for something softer?" His words burned, but instead of breaking me, they became more fuel. During that time, I lived on ramen noodles and black coffee, stretching every paycheck from the bar. Nights blurred into mornings as I coded relentlessly, debugging until my eyes burned. I taped Margaret's ruby ring to the corner of my laptop screen, a reminder that I was worth more than their rejection. Finally, after months of failure, I met an angel investor named Raymond Torres. He was skeptical at first, but when I demonstrated how my prototype could detect vulnerabilities faster than existing software, his eyes lit up. "If what you're saying is true, this could change the game," he said. He offered me my first seed investment, enough to rent a small office and hire 2 interns. That was the birth of Fortress Tech. The early days were brutal. Our office was a cramped space above a laundromat, the smell of detergent seeping through the walls. We worked 18-hour days, surviving on takeout and pure adrenaline. Bugs plagued our system, servers crashed, and sometimes I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, the pieces began to fit. We landed our first client, a small law firm terrified of being hacked. Then a local bank signed on. Word spread, and soon, larger companies began knocking at our door. By the third year, Fortress Tech had expanded into a sleek downtown building with glass walls and buzzing energy. Our software was being adopted globally, praised for its precision and resilience. Journalists called me the Cyber Queen, a title that felt surreal. When Forbes featured me on their cover, I stared at my own face in disbelief, remembering the girl who once cried herself to sleep in Chicago because she didn't belong. But with success came emptiness. I had built everything I once dreamed of: wealth, recognition, power. Yet when the office lights dimmed and the accolades faded, I returned to my penthouse alone. Sometimes in the quiet, I found myself scrolling through old social media posts, watching Damien and Clara smiling at family reunions I had never been invited to. My name is never mentioned, my existence conveniently erased. The 5th anniversary of Fortress Tech hit me especially hard. We held a gala to celebrate, attended by CEOs, politicians, and innovators. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and speeches hailed my vision. But that night, as I sat in my office afterward, I opened Instagram and saw Clara's post. Another reunion. Another gathering where everyone laughed, hugged, and toasted, as though I had never been part of them. The caption read, "Family is everything." Couldn't ask for more. The words cut deeper than I expected. I stared at the photo of them all together, smiling in the warm glow of string lights, and I felt something snap inside me. 15 years had passed, and they had never once reached out. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not even when news of my success splashed across every headline. They had built a life where I didn't exist. So I made a choice. I would stop looking back. I bought a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the Bay Area, a mansion with tall iron gates and sprawling gardens that no one could enter unless I allowed it. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, symbolic of the walls I had built around myself. But even as I locked the world out, I began searching for something deeper. I started mentoring young women in tech, offering them the guidance I once received from Professor Lin. I funded scholarships for underprivileged students who couldn't afford laptops or tuition. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to build a chosen family, one made not of blood, but of trust and shared dreams. What I didn't know was that fate wasn't done with me yet. Because just as I had begun to feel at peace, the past came knocking literally on the iron gates of my mansion. It was a gray afternoon when my security cameras picked up the unfamiliar figures at my gate. I was upstairs in the study, reviewing reports, when an alert pinged on my phone. At first, I thought it was another delivery or perhaps a stranger who had lost their way. But when I tapped the screen and saw the faces staring up at the lens, my heart stopped. There they were: Richard, Helen, Damien, and Clara. The very family that had cast me aside for 15 years, standing nervously at the entrance of the empire I had built. I froze, staring at their older, wearier faces. Richard's hair had turned almost white, his shoulders slumped with age. Helen clutched her handbag like it was a lifeline, her lips pressed tight as though holding back words. Damien was heavier now, his arrogance softened by exhaustion, while Clara's once perfect smile looked strained, her eyes shadowed by worry. The sight of them stirred something inside me, not love, not longing, but a deep, simmering ache mixed with a flicker of vindication. They were here, on my turf, after ignoring my existence for over a decade. My intercom buzzed. "Miss Leela," my head of security said, "they're asking to see you. Should I send them away?" For a moment, I was tempted, but then a thought struck me. After everything, I deserved answers. I deserved to look them in the eye and show them just how much I had grown beyond their rejection. "Let them in," I said quietly. Minutes later, I walked down the grand staircase into the marble-floored foyer as the doors swung open. They stepped inside cautiously, their gazes darting around the chandeliers and gilded mirrors, clearly overwhelmed by the scale of the mansion. I stood tall at the base of the stairs, dressed sharply in a navy suit, my expression calm but unreadable. "Hello," I said, my voice echoing in the vast hall. "Long time." Helen's eyes flickered with something like shame before she spoke. "Leela, we came because we need your help." There it was. Not an apology, not a word about the years of silence. Straight to need. I folded my arms, watching them squirm. 15 years without a phone call, without a single visit, and now you show up at my gate asking for help. Interesting. Damien cleared his throat. Things haven't been easy. The business went under. Clara's husband lost his job. We're drowning, Leela. You have more than enough to spare. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling. We know we made mistakes. We should have treated you better, but we're family. Doesn't that mean something? I laughed, the sound sharp against the silence. Family? Do you even remember the last words you said to me? Or how many reunions you held without even acknowledging my existence? I've seen the photos, Clara. The Christmas cards I sent that you threw away. The email you sent to a friend about how you hoped I wouldn't ruin the vibe if I showed up. Clara's face was drained of color. You saw that? Yes, I replied coldly. I saw everything, and it taught me a valuable lesson. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by love. And you gave me none. Richard finally spoke, his voice gravelly. We were wrong, but we're desperate, Leela. We need money, or we'll lose everything. For a moment, I studied the four of them standing there, reduced from the confident figures of my childhood to hollow shells. Part of me wanted to shout, to throw their neglect back in their faces until they crumbled. But instead, I felt a strange calm. Revenge, I realized, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was quiet, precise, and unforgettable. I won't give you money, I said firmly. Their eyes widened in shock. But I will set up education funds for your children. My niece and nephew don't deserve to suffer because of your choices. Beyond that, you get nothing from me. Helen's lips quivered. That's all? After everything you've accomplished, you can't find it in your heart to forgive us? My jaw tightened. Forgiveness is earned, not begged for at the gates of a mansion. You didn't just forget me, you erased me. You made sure I grew up believing I was never enough. And you expect me to forget all that because you're in trouble now? No, I built this life without you, and I will continue to live it without you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. For what it's worth, I am proud of you. The words should have touched me, but instead they felt empty, like a too late offering on a grave. I gave her a curt nod and turned away. You may leave now. Security will escort you out. As they shuffled out of my mansion, heads bowed, I felt an unexpected release. For years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, but watching them walk away, I realized that burden no longer belonged to me. They had come begging, and I had stood firm. I hadn't humiliated them. I hadn't lashed out. I had simply refused to give them the power they once held over me. That night, I sat in my study, Margaret's ruby ring glinting under the desk lamp. I thought of her, the only one who had ever truly seen me, and I knew what I needed to do next. I established the Margaret Grace Foundation, dedicated to supporting foster children and young people who had been cast aside like I once was. Every scholarship, every mentorship, every home built in that foundation's name became a piece of the legacy my grandmother believed I deserved. I built my future not on bitterness, but on purpose. And though I would never share another Christmas dinner with Richard, Helen, Damien, or Clara, I was no longer haunted by their absence. I had found my chosen family, and with them, I finally understood what love truly meant. Moral lesson. Hello guys, thank you for listening to my story. What I learned through all of this is that blood does not define love. Sometimes the people we expect to protect us are the very ones who wound us deepest. But healing comes when we stop begging for a seat at the wrong table and build our own instead. I discovered that revenge doesn't always mean striking back. It can mean living so fully, so boldly, that those who rejected you can no longer ignore your existence. It can mean using your success to lift others who've walked the same lonely path. If you've ever been excluded, unloved, or made to feel like you don't belong, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by how others see you. It's defined by how you choose to rise, how you choose to love, and how you choose to build a life that reflects your strength. So my encouragement to you is don't waste your pain. Turn it into power, and let your story inspire someone else. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment with the lesson you took away from my story.